Now, today's event, Determining Home Sales Price. This webinar will give NSP grantees and their partners guidance on the crucial steps necessary in determining an accurate sales price for NSP properties. Our presenters will review how to set asking sale price, key to appraisal, how to adjust sales prices in different neighborhood markets. You'll see examples of how to determine sales price and how some NSP grantees have done this. The webinar is interactive, and participants will have an opportunity for questions and answers at one point during the presentation and again following the presentation. And this webinar is for all NSP grantees and their partners. With us today are Martha Davis and Paul Webster. Martha will be doing the presentation. Paul Webster is available in the Q&A session to add his perspective when appropriate. We also have Jesse Hanforth-Combe and David Noguera and Hunter Kurtz with us from the NSP office. So welcome to all of you. Glad you're here. And at this point, I will turn it over to Martha.
All right. Noon again, everyone. Glad we have a nice turnout for this topic. I'm going to try to go through some of the basics about setting sales prices. I want to try to refer, when I can, to some real-world issues that have arisen in some of my consulting work with different grantees over the past year or so in NSP single-family programs. So looking at this agenda, the first section is really on the technical rules one must follow, and in particular some exploration of the definition of total development cost as the most key part of that rule. Second, going at appraisal, we'll just do a little background on the helpfulness and some key elements of appraisals, property appraisals, and then really kind of get into some meat of how you might design your program and which principles you'll follow in deciding in your locality what ground rules to use in setting your sales prices. And then look at some special cases when adjustments are needed and some others. So that's kind of the overview of what we'll go through this afternoon. There's a real simple NSP rule for sales prices, and it's the same rule in NSP 1, 2, and 3. And that is that the maximum sale price in any single-family home is the total development cost, which we'll get into quite a bit in a minute. There's no minimum price threshold, although we have some advice about that. And the recommended practice, and I think it's a pretty widespread best practice, the sale price be set as lesser of TDC, total development cost, or the fair market value, which would typically be indicated by use of an appraisal. Just to now into total development cost, many of you are familiar with this, but I want to just review it and talk about a couple detailed issues. TDC is all of the direct costs of acquiring, constructing, or renovating a property, and that would include both hard costs of construction, soft costs, which typically include design costs, inspections, construction interest if there is a loan, maintenance costs during the construction, etc. And a third category noted here, activity delivery costs on behalf of a grantee, which is providing some direct input, could also be included, and that would be fairly limited, really just something like construction inspection of hands-on property-specific activity that a grantee might provide in addition to the development. TDC does not include, this is by HUD policy, property maintenance costs outside of the development period. And I think there's some recent discussion and guidance that this development period would be defined as the time when the developer or grantee acquires the property. This NSP program and stretch up and through the construction period and up until time 30 days after the construction or renovation is complete. So that would be the development period where property maintenance is included in TDC. Time before that, before it's bought, and time after that would be included in the definition of TDC. And this is just in context of TDC definition for sales price maximum rule. Second bullet here, disposition costs in the case where there's an NSP home and you end up not doing any real rehabilitation or redevelopment and it's just bought and then resold later, those costs of sale would not be eligible to be counted as TDC. So again, the significance of TDC here is it's used at maximum sales price. In many markets, it may not turn out to be the price at all, but it is a maximum. For detail on this precise subject, HUD issued a policy alert updated last September, and it's there's a link to this alert at the end of this, in one of the last slides of this program today. So it's a 3-page table within that policy alert, and it goes through a number of types of costs in pre-development, development, post-development, and it basically reiterates that TDC costs would be, and this is quoting from the beginning, those expenses which are integral and allocable to the design, construction, occupancy, sale of a real estate project. And one of the main lessons is then a grantee's administrative overhead, research, planning, expense, et cetera, would not be direct costs that would be in TDC, but direct real estate type costs would be. So this is probably, if you've got any questions, a good policy alert just to check out. And a reminder about record keeping, because this TDC limit is one of the clear paramount rules in NSP. HUD will be looking that you as a grantee keep records that prove that the sales prices of the properties are below TDC. And so you have to have a record of what the TDC is, which would include the component parts of each element of the budget adding up to the TDC, and then also a record with the eventual sales price that we indicated in a contract or a HUD-1 settlement statement. And the sources of the funds is kind of encompassed in those, but when someone buys, they might use a variety of different loan and grant sources to make a total purchase price that would be in the record. Use funds is pretty much the same as the total development costs for that property. And those records, if there are developers doing the properties, would be initially maintained by the developers. They need to be kept by grantees and grant partners as well, since you would be subject to audit on that. So let's into the kind of general section here with a few slides just about appraisals. In cities and localities, appraisals do play a key role in setting, after rehab appraisals, in setting sales prices. So it's a requirement by HUD rule, but it's a recommended practice here. Some of the advantages, both practical, political, operational advantages of using an appraisal. An appraiser, of course, is a professional who's giving an objective opinion as to the value of a property. So it's a third party giving professional opinion. Standardized means of support fair market value, and so throughout different neighborhoods, you might be working in one locality. Throughout different neighborhoods, the same objective process would be used in each neighborhood, and it would lead to could support sales at the fair market value. We'll get into that issue later. Of course, appraisal, when a buyer obtains a private loan from from a bank or other source, there'll be an appraisal ordered by that lender. And so getting an appraisal up front will just help align the expectations, what you expect it to sell for, and what in the lender is willing to lend on as a market value. And that's really illustrating the planning. It helps you plan how many you might be able to sell for what kind of price range, and what program income that might therefore generate. And in terms of kind of a political lever, so to speak, it justifies your decision as a grantee in setting prices, or the price you allow developers to set. So it provides a clear, objective standard for that. Again, it's a professional doing this. Grantees don't have the depth of staff expertise in-house to really be a current appraiser. It's standardized. I think I really mentioned these before. But sellers can look at the price as being an objective one, not some kind of with any kind of slant from the grantee or the developer. And we'll get buyer assistance, and that would play into covering the full purchase price. Appraisal will be made for an after rehab value. You would have received an appraisal much earlier in the process when a site is first, a vacant or foreclosed site is first acquired. It would be an appraisal of the as-is value at that time. This is a different appraisal. It's an as-complete appraisal, and it's either based on seeing the house completed, or more likely it's based on seeing the specifications and the contract and plans that are going to be used when construction is started or renovation is started. The timing of this appraisal could be ordered well before the construction is complete, and that timing does assist the developer or sub-grantee doing the development to be marketing before the completion, and that's advisable if you want to try to line up a buyer to be available as soon as possible after completion. So just a word on getting a good appraisal. One should use an independent appraiser, not one that's associated with any particular developer or contractor or city councilman or whatever. Generally, states would license the appraiser. So a licensed independent appraiser gives you that objectivity and competence you're looking for. You may give some just advice to the appraiser. If your property is located in a very distressed neighborhood where there are very few sales or no sales of houses in good condition or renovated or newly constructed houses, that appraiser may need to go a little farther afield geographically to find an adjacent neighborhood where there have been physically comparable sales within the past 6 months. So sometimes NSP neighborhoods are a challenge to appraise. I do want to highlight, you or the developer, highlight to the appraiser special features that might be in homes, and certainly high energy efficiency is a across-the-board feature of NSP construction renovation. It's something that you'd like to see show up as a little bit of a boost to the appraised value. That's appraisals. I want to get now really to the meat of the policies that you'll consider as a grantee in designing the rules around how you want your developers to set sales price, or you yourself set sales price. The factors to think about are these NSP rules we've just mentioned. You want something that will result in affordability for your target market, way or another, and you want to achieve your NSP program goals, primarily neighborhood revitalization. So neighborhood revitalization is a little different than providing affordable housing to your constituent groups, and that's why the sale price level is a key issue, balancing those two. So we're going to look in this presentation at kind of two different options as approaches to achieving affordability and neighborhood stabilization. In option one, a locality might design a program to price homes to be directly affordable to buyers in the target income group that you're assisting. Two, priced at appraised market value, and if that value is not affordable, you would link this pricing with targeted home buyer assistance. So let's look at one. You have probably income groups that you're targeting within your locality. They may well be up 120% my level, or they might be more low-income groups traditionally you might have served. And, of course, you have your 50% AMI set-aside group to possibly serve through your program. So you know what target income group you're thinking of. In this option one scenario, you would go ahead and say for somebody in that income range, how much can they afford to buy in a home? And that how much can afford is a little calculation here, looking at a front-end ratio that is typically used of 30%. That's saying that the buyer's monthly housing expenses should be 30% of their gross monthly household income. And that expense would include mortgage principal, interest, private mortgage insurance, if there is that, real estate taxes, and home insurance. And so that calculation can be made, or it's just arithmetic, depending on the income range you're trying to reach. Example of this option one, there's a home that's developed. It's after rehab appraised value is $160,000. But the locality has decided they're targeting people in the income range of $40,000 a year, household income. That's monthly income of $4,000. Using this front-end ratio of 30%, that gives you $100 a month target housing expense total. And when you do the math at calculating what kind of mortgage that would lead to with a small down payment, that would lead you, depending on the interest rate assumption, but something like $148,000 sales price. That's the mortgage someone would afford, let's say $147,000 with a $1,000 down payment. Oops, sorry. So in this case, you're pricing the home at $148,000. You're pricing the home below the appraised value, and I'm going to talk about the implications of that in a minute. But this is on one where you really have a straightforward, affordable sales price. Two, it's really relying on home ownership assistance to be an additional tool. And the reason option two is looked at here, it mentions neighborhood housing values, the second bullet. Neighborhood housing values may be undermined if you have a program where you have widespread sales at rate below the fair market value for the neighborhood. For private or publicly assisted sales leads to lower values. Those become comparables in future appraisals. So here is if you have a soft market neighborhood, you want to try to use your NSP pricing as a tool to bolster appraised values across the board, to bolster what becomes a new market value in the neighborhood. You're reducing houses that are probably in better condition than the average for the neighborhood. You want these to be, high value, as high value as they can, according to a competent appraisal. But the issue is, how does someone afford? How does your target home buyer afford this market value? And so, in option two, an example of how homeownership assistance be used to achieve both the affordability and the bolstering neighborhood market values. For example, the same house is raised at $160,000. That buyer can afford a first mortgage of $147,000 and a down payment of $1,000. Rather than selling the house for $148,000, selling the house for $160,000, and you're offering $12,000 in a non-payable mortgage to that home buyer. And that is sized. Each time you have an applicant, it's sized correctly for that particular applicant. People are not over-subsidized or under-subsidized. They just get what they need to afford that market value of $160. Giving an example from Cleveland, Ohio, they've got a success program that's been operating for some months. They use this option 2. They set their prices at the appraised value. They underwrite each buyer to see how much that individual household can afford in a first mortgage. And so their values are a little bit lower, typically, let's say $150,000. In their program, they've defined a minimum down payment required of just $500, and a maximum in their program, home buyer assistance maximum of 20% of the price. So in example, that would be $30,000. They don't necessarily go up to that maximum. In this case, some have to at least be able to qualify for a first mortgage of $119,500. Maybe they'd qualify for $125,000, in which case they'd receive the difference in the form of a soft second mortgage from the grantee, Cleveland. And there is another advantage, I guess, administratively to this option 2. That is, that second mortgage is termed home buyer assistance in the NSP lingo, and that means that when you're looking at long-term affordability requirements, recapture, resale choices, you're able to use recapture rather than resale restrictions. If your locality would prefer the probably simpler route of having recapture, it means if you have that second mortgage, sub-recapture if the affordability period is related by a premature sale or lease of the house. You as grantee can recapture the funds. You've met your HUD required affordability requirements through that. Different detailed mechanisms of how that second mortgage would be recaptured, how much of it would be repaid. But whichever mechanism is used, it means that they're fairly simple, administratively simple to meet your affordability requirements. That owner needs to remain principal owner-occupant for the period of time. Then the recapture mechanism way. If the person violates it, you have a one-time recapture event, and you're not tracking that house any further as grantee. Okay, let me pause here. This is kind of the basic core of this program, and I've got some special case issues I want to go into in the last slides, but I want to see what questions there are so far.
Good. We have some questions. Jody asked, how does one convince an appraiser not to use distressed sales? That seems to be the only comps our local appraiser will use.
Wow. Well, an appraiser, supposed to try to find houses that are geographically proximate, but they're also supposed to try to use physically comparable houses. And so I'm assuming if those distressed sales are in need of repair, or maybe drastically in need of repair, I would make the argument to that appraiser that they need to go further afield and find houses that are in good condition, number one. And second, a distress sale implies that there's sort of some sellers under pressure to perhaps take whatever they can get for the sale, and you're presenting a kind of a normal transaction in your NSP sale, and you tell that appraiser, they would try to find non-distressed sale really is more comparable in the sense that there's not a pressure on the seller, a desperation on the seller's part to have to sell in a certain time frame. So I guess those are the two arguments I would try to make, and maybe you could do some research yourself if possible, see or you might need to go, how far the appraiser might need to go in order to find a more typical and good condition sort of sale transaction. Let me know if there's any follow-up question to that.
Okay, thanks for that question, Jody. And I'm going to go to Samuel. You've got a question about undue enrichment, and perhaps the option 2 that Martha presented answered your question, but let's hear it from you.
Let's assume an agency doesn't have access to down payment assistance funds. Presumably would close the ability gap. Are they still allowed to unload that property for an amount less than full market value?
Here's my two-part answer, and others may want to add. They're saying in the rules of NSP to prevent you from selling at a low market price. It's, I think, not the best thing for the neighborhood values, but it does not violate rules. But back to your assumption, in localities that I know about, their mortgage money really is NSP money. That if the NSP program is providing a subsidy to the developer during the development period to pay for part of the rehab cost, and be providing $100,000 to that developer, part of that money really can be recycled to become homebuyer assistance in option 2 scenario.
But absent that,
well, are you providing NSP money in the development phase?
I'm sorry?
Your locality is providing NSP subsidy in the development phase. Is that entire subsidy kind of eaten up by? Let me see. If you provide subsidy for a house that costs $100,000 to build, renovate, acquire, and renovate, and then the market value turns out to be only $100,000, your subsidy could all go into just that difference. And maybe that's your situation.
Actually, you hit it on the head. That happens more times than not. But the issue isn't so much the subsidy as it is the fair market challenge issue. And I thought the property had to be sold at the less fair market value or total development cost. Total development costs usually do not always exceed value, but it sounds as though in your hypothetical you just mentioned, if that property, if we want to sell it at, if it up at $100,000, but we want to sell it at $80,000 without providing a second trustee, we could do that.
Well, definitely my understanding of the rules. The rule you quoted is often quoted as being the rule, the lesser of TDC or appraised value. But the understanding is it's not. It's a best practice, but it's not a requirement. And you could sell that house for $80,000.
Yeah, Martha, this is David Noga. I'll just say, yes, that's certainly acceptable if you can justify that to be a reasonable cost or a reasonable price based on the needs of the buyer, then it's appropriate to reduce the price.
Okay. I asked Dave, is there actually a HUD bulletin that further discusses this that we can put in file when we have this occurrence?
Well, it wouldn't be as explicit as what I just said. It would be, a lot of our guidance speaks in the general sense of how you go about using homeownership assistance rules to make a property affordable, right? A variety of options available to you to make the property affordable. In terms of, if you'd like to submit a question using the AQs, we could probably get something back to you in writing that way.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Samuel. And I think we've answered Michael's question, which was if a post-rehab fair market appraisal is not required to establish sales price, how else would we establish it? Our direction is to set the maximum price at the lesser of TDC and appraised price.
So an appraisal is recommended. It is not required. And so your direction that you mentioned is a good one, that of using both TDC or appraised value. So I think, assuming your borrower is going to get a bank loan, there's going to be an appraisal coming down the road with market value. So using an appraisal to your price up front is just a good practice to help you have an expectation for what that lender and buyer will be wanting to pay.
And finally, let's go to...
Could I just interrupt for a moment?
Sure.
This is Paul. A requirement that you have an appraisal, and the property can be sold at less than fair market value if the difference can be justified. But the key when you're trying to establish what fair market value is, appraisal is probably the best and most objective evidence of documentation of fair market value, but it's not the only one. So there are other means that an approach that might be used to estimate the fair market value. I think the crucial is that before the property is sold, that the price there should be some valuation of the other market value documented. And I think that if the grantee does that, then it is going along with protecting itself against findings or monitoring findings later on, because at least you would have tried to establish. And the fair market appraisers is nothing but an estimate itself. So the key, I think, that you try to establish fair market value, looking at the approaches that might be used. The appraisal is obviously the one that would be most advised as the best approach in most cases, but it's not the only one.
And if I could be back on that, this is Martha. I think that it's possible in a market which may be declining, even since we began the NSP program, the market may have softened locally. You may be surprised at how low an appraisal may even come in. So it could turn out to be what you thought perhaps was unaffordable turns out to be naturally affordable because values have declined.
That's a good point. And let's go to, who's next? Let's go to Matt. Matt. Constantine.
Hi. Yes.
Hello.
Hello?
Go ahead.
I had a question. Appraisals are being mentioned with fair market values, and just curious, with affordability restrictions that are required with NSP2, how are these communicating that to appraisers, and shouldn't these appraisals be coming back below fair market values due to affordability restrictions?
That's a good question, and this is my take on it. It depends, I think, partly which of the two mechanisms for affordability the locality is using. And yes, it should be communicated to the appraiser. But if you're using a recapture mechanism, in my opinion, I'm not sure that would really depress the market value of that home. It's that's requiring that first buyer to live. It's not constraining the future resale of that property. Whereas if the locality is using sales restrictions, and for 20 years it needs to be sold to people in the same low income range, I'd agree. Yes, that could depress the value in the appraiser's mind. So I think two are different.
Okay. Thank you.
Matt? And who's next? That looks like Elizabeth, who asks, when determining the sales price, should we take into account all sources of funding in establishing the total development cost? This pertains to leveraging of funds where NSP and private dollars are being used to complete the overall project.
So, yeah, short answer is yes. Regardless of the funding source, you want to look at the spending, the cost of doing the acquisition and construction, and the associated soft costs. So, only the total development cost is based, regardless of whether private or public funds are used, are the source. Advisory, policy advisory that's referenced at the end of this presentation kind of reiterates that in detail. So you might look at that too.
Let's to Jennifer Elliott. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer? Jennifer, sounds like you're almost there. But
hi, I'm sorry. My mute was on, and I property on the market, and it's been there for 6 months, and we have some adjacent properties that they're lowering the sales prices, that are ours, but other properties lowering their prices. How document lowering a sales price when we had it at a price based on the after rehab value?
We're actually going to get to that topic in the next couple slides.
Okay.
So
sounds great.
I can do that and call back if that's not clear enough from
Sounds
them.
great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
And Leon, where is Leon? Hi, there you go. Leon? Leon Romanazzi? May have stepped away. And let's go then to Kim's question. Kim asks, or says that we built 2 duplexes with 2 units each, cost $550,000 each. Appraisal came in at $160,000, much to our surprise. What would the selling price be?
Well, it's a shock sometimes. The degree of value is less than the development cost, but that's pretty common, maybe not that quite that degree, but it's common across the country. So I certainly think if you're going to attract a buyer, you've got to use that appraised value as your selling price. No one to come and pay $550,000 for it.
Thank you, Kim. And let's go to Jeff Holmes.
Oh, sorry, my mute was on. You there?
We can hear you.
My question was, I sent it in, but that's all you guys can ask me. Can you use a real estate broker to determine a value as an option?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes. That's Paul Webb mentioned a few minutes ago that appraisal is not the only way to go, and so a broker opinion, if it's something that you trust, is acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah, that's unless it's otherwise required. Like for the, I see the statute explicitly states that for foreclosed homes, that the appraisal is required to determine current market value, but have a little more flexibility with the vacant and abandoned properties.
My understanding is that this is Martha, that the appraisal requirement for foreclosed homes pertains to the initial acquisition of the development.
You're right.
And I was going to mention that's a confusing thing because that appraisal is often discussed in NSP rules, but
right.
To be clear, it's still the case that an appraisal is not, by rule, not required for this second transaction, the resale after renovation or construction.
Good. Let's see. We've got a couple questions that I think have been clarified. And John L. would like, again, if you could go over suggestions on how to set a price below the fair market value total development cost to make a home affordable for the home buyer without causing a decline in value for the neighborhood, which was your option 2.
Well, I think without causing a decline for the neighborhood, or in fact, hopefully creating a little boost for the neighborhood. Again, that's in slides option 2, where the price is not necessarily directly affordable to that buyer without some second mortgage assistance. I'm certain if this is what you meant, is to reiterate that. Option 2, again, is in order to protect neighborhood values, you have perhaps higher sales price. You need to offer second mortgage to that buyer. Option 1, you have direct affordability to that buyer, but in reality, you do sacrifice the neighborhood value trend by establishing a below-market comparable. You know, if I didn't respond fully.
And Kim asks, broker is higher than the appraised value. Which do you use?
I think it partly might be a timing issue, and I'm going to actually get into timing questions in the slide, but let me just say if some significant time elapsed in between and it seems like, in fact, the market strengthened, you could potentially use that for opinion. If from general information your market is not strengthening and it's sort of more of a fluke, I would say it's really not advisable to use a higher price if it's not clear that it's better, more accurate. The lawyer will end up getting an appraisal right at the time that buyer is the buyer has signed a contract. So that will be really kind of a third opinion that would come in at that time. But I would hesitate to raise the price unless I'm confident that broker had better information, newer information than the appraiser had. I don't know if others have an opinion about that.
This is Paul Lepser again. You're the owner of the property. If you want to, you can, if the broker's opinion, you market it at that, and if it doesn't sell, then you can put the price. But it's really up to the grantee to make an informed judgment. Again, these days in particular, you're getting and the way estimates are just that. And in the end, you have to have a willing buyer as well as a willing seller, and it depends on what the buyer is willing to pay for it. If they're willing to pay higher than the appraised estimate, then that's fine. But you're really not continuing to use the appraiser if one is done. You just have to exercise good judgment and you also know your market and make a judgment between the two, or you can try to do that. But you have the flexibility to use either. Because again, that you've got something that you provides you with a estimate of value. Someone who want to second guess you later on, such as auditors or even God forbid that, if you have used the broker estimate, at least you're using their value, and if you could sell that, then so much the better. So I think you have the option to use either.
Jesse, I see your hand up, but I cannot unmute you, so you can submit your question in writing, or you can go to the event info tab and call in using all of that information. And let's go to Cardigan. Cardigan?
Hi, Cardigan in Chicago. We actually do use CMAs. We've got, I guess, a group of about 10 procured agents actually provide us with pricing for the properties going onto market. The problem obviously is right now is construction and the timeline it takes to get through construction. Appraisers are going to these 9-day appraisal windows now that the appraisals are expiring, so we're having properties that, once we're in contract for us, a price that maybe we were using 3 months ago, by the time that appraisal comes back out, it's much more the appraisal that they did 3 months. If we didn't close in time, a new appraisal has to be ordered and the appraisal may be lower. So I guess my question is, how low can you go at some point in time when it gets to the point where you sold the property and it's taking a much longer time period from what initial assessment of that value was?
I'll take, if I understand exactly, I think I have to go as low as the final appraisal that's going to be in effect at time of closing. And so I'm assuming you're talking about lender-ordered appraisals here toward the end, which expire. And so time-wise, if you try to wait long enough to order it, that it will still be good by the time you close. So that's one side. But it's got to be redone, or if it's a new appraisal after a pre-opinion you got way before construction started and it's signing, I think you have to keep going as low as the last bank-sanctioned appraisal. I would think the bank is not willing to close on a second mortgage that's going to exceed 100% loan to value when added to the first. So I think start reducing your sales price so that your loan amounts stay aligned with loan to value. Use a last value in effect.
That answers it. It's looking at that last appraisal, is that a new? Looking at appraisals, if that property doesn't close, is that our new price? That's what we probably should use, I'm guessing. So.
Doesn't close, and you have to then go find a new buyer.
Correct. We need a new price because we've got an appraisal that was at basically this new appraisal that's in the system for 3 months or 6 months, whatever.
Well, I suppose when you read the appraisal, you could decide if you feel it's a fair appraisal. If for some reason it seems too conservative, I think you're free to have a different price for marketing purposes. New buyer, again, would get a lender appraiser when that new buyer moves towards closing. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Cardigan. And if you'd lower your hand, I'd appreciate it. Next up, let's try Jennifer again. Jennifer E., are you there?
Yes.
Hi. Go ahead. What's your question?
I think I raised my hand. I had already asked my question, and the host said that she would be
right. Getting it in the last
okay. I keep doing everything around it, and we'll get there. I think a few of us might be having that issue. So.
Gotcha. Yep. My fault.
Right.
There we go.
No, that's okay. Thanks.
Thank you. And who else here? So we've got some information back from Joniel about an example, what would happen in scenario 2, which we can go into if you care to, Martha. So think about that. And in the meantime, Kim asks, do we justify to the public the significantly reduced price of the new construction?
How to justify to the public the
significantly reduced price?
I see. The reduced sale price compared to the construction cost?
Yes.
That's the. That's a good question. I don't have the magic bullet on that. But it is that you need to demonstrate that you're trying to keep actual costs as low as reasonable. On the other hand, you're paying for probably full renovation or construction and adding energy efficiency elements that cost something extra. So I don't know if that would be convincing, but the thing is, I think the public can't expect you to try to sell a house for more than the market value, and so it's the only way it works if you sell a house at the market value, and I think you just have to try to indicate you're keeping costs as low as possible, and as long as if your costs are lining up with other private sector costs you might document, that might help. But this is not a foolproof response, but
maybe showing too that there's not going to be undue enrichment to the
okay, yeah,
to the buyer.
Part of being reasonable.
Martha, one thing I just want to reiterate is that while we understand the level of investments that are being made into these properties to upbuild them, right? We have to be reminded that this was a grant that was given to the cities, right, to uplift these depressed communities, right? So in many cases, we're putting green principles or we're putting energy efficient appliances and practices to make the standard of housing in these neighborhoods more marketable, more sustainable, so that to ultimately attract folks. If this means that the grantees aren't going to be able to get their full investment out of the property, okay, right? We didn't go into this NSP thing to make a profit here, right? It's intended to serve the families that meet the income qualifications, right? And to address the housing crisis that we've been having. So if the development subsidy is needed, that's fine. Just want to add that point.
Yeah. And one other thing, in the discrepancy between the cost and the sales value, partly just reflects the state of the local market, and that's not, if that local market is depressed and that sale price is low, that's a fact of life that's the hand that you all were dealt, as well as the public. So this is, only on David's main point, it's to create new housing stock or revitalized housing stock despite the fact the market is low, and this is the only way to do that.
Good. So, Martha, I suggest you proceed with your presentation, and we can come back to Joniel's example option 2 later if there's time.
Okay, great. Advance this here. Okay, so there's one slide here just on kind of the special case, which has not come up yet in the questions, but on occasion and probably most often through the Habitat for Humanity model, development cost might actually be lower than market value. And when market value is the desired sales price, the discrepancy kind of goes in the other direction. This is a case where you have significant donations of supplies, appliances, etc., and perhaps significant donations of labor as well. And the case is then when TC is actually fairly low because of those donations. And then a case, the HUD rule, the quirk of the rule is that you're stuck selling the house for no more than that TDC. So market values in the neighborhood might be $120,000, but the cost to actually do the property was $100,000. Then that $100,000 is the price. And the comment here is to point out that they're forced to have a low price, but to make extra efforts to make sure that all of the costs, and more hidden costs perhaps, are included in TDC. And if you have such a thing as like volunteer administration to recruit and volunteers or other things directly required for that house rehab construction, to make sure TDC is accurately reflecting all of the costs. Comment just would be if the TDC is below market, and that's a negative for future sales prices. Don't concentrate many of those such houses in one spot. You don't want a whole bunch of houses that are all right at $100,000 sales prices, and that just brings the values in the neighborhood down. Do what you can to sprout that negative market effect. This is a kind of an outlier, but just something we want to mention in this presentation. The last topic is to this kind of, declining market situation. So let's say at the beginning of the year, the renovation begins, an appraisal is obtained, and the appraisal says the house is $120,000. The projection is worth $120,000, and things change during the course of that renovation period, and the market might change. We're suggesting is that, in fact, the grantee and the developer need to keep an eye on that market. As the questioner mentioned, maybe you'll see that other houses in the vicinity are raising their prices to try to sell. Unfortunately, you're possibly, will need to follow suit. The one caveat I want to mention is, especially in a really slow market where the sales process may drag out over some period of time, as a grantee, you want to try to ensure that your developers and the real estate agents are still actively marketing the property, or maintain it in good physical condition, keeping the yard up as the months pass, keeping things in working order, making it look nice. Hopefully, have a realtor host open houses, continuing to do outreach so that the property is known about. So I think in certain localities, when time has passed, there's kind of semi-abandonment of the marketing of a property, and it's really going to get marketed, never going to get sold. As a minimum, the grantee needs to require a certain amount of monthly attention, activity, open houses, maybe check on the conditions of those houses yourself to make sure the curb appeal is kept up by the developer. So that's one is just making sure that the attention is paid to marketing. The other circumstance is the market is actually dropping. And in this, I think, as Chicago caller indicated, you're really forced to meet the market as it declines. There's in the standard single-family toolkit that's found on the HUD website, NSP website. There's some generic language, not necessarily for a falling market, but it could fit into a category. It suggests that with a robust marketing effort, if no qualified offers are received in the first 60 days of robust marketing, the developer might be allowed to reduce the asking price by 5%. If no qualified offers received in the following 60 days, another 5% adjustment might be made. This is kind of generic advice, but it's introducing the concept that there has to be some flexibility retained by the grantee and the developer. And if it is falling as you operate your program, you're unfortunately forced to your values, with that. I would suggest that if you get a reasonable offer, that's pursued, maybe a little bit below list price, and in the end, the lender will be an appraisal to correspond to that contract, and that appraisal in the end will really be governing if it's lower. So the lender appraiser kind of trumps of your prior the price or the asking price before that. So I don't have, in the case that the questioner, I think it was Jennifer, posed, I don't really have a solution to, to some extent, matching the declines in the offering price. If your product, if your house is really substantially similar. The thing is to try to market the fact that energy efficient as much as possible, the lower operating costs that brings. Maybe the product is a little bit superior to some of those surrounding houses. That would justify a little bit higher sales price, asking price.
So,
yes.
One thing I just wanted to add is that in some cases where grantees find that the markets are continuing to put in value and it's just really not feasible for them to sell it, they can always switch gears and rent it. We have some cases where where grantees have houses on the market for an extended period of time, and rather than keeping it vacant and hoping that it'll sell, they revert to a short-term rental. All right, in some cases it may be 2 to 5 years or something like that. But another way to sort of take the property off market while still benefiting income-eligible households, and then revisiting the for-sale market at a later date.
I would agree with that. If really the marketing efforts have been consistent and haven't yielded anything, then I guess that's a last-ditch effort. It's not really what most of the neighborhoods where single-family homes predominate, or of course get owner-occupants in there. And your program design presumably was around an ownership program, and so if you did resort to this rental backup option, then you need, as I understand it, you'd need to set up rental conformance with the ESP rental program. So you'd need to have some guidelines over property management and marketing and income certifications, et cetera. But it's good to get it's a valuable fallback, but none that you should take lightly, I'd say. Just at the end of the slides here, that we've got some references here in the slides, and these slides will be on the website, so you can use these links to find this standard template for single-family program manual, guide to marketing, prior webinar, the TD guidance that I mentioned earlier on. So they're good resources there. I did add just one other marketing, and we'll get back to the falling market issue, but one other marketing detail that's another little query is the the appraised value of a home is $100,000 in a certain market, but you're expecting your target market would need some assistance, a soft second mortgage, so they'd only be able to afford $130,000. Your MIS listing, if it's using that tool, would be seeing the full sales price at $150,000, and so it's important to work with your agents and developers to try to make sure information gets out that there is some special financing available to attract the potential buyers who can't afford the $150,000. At least in the comment section of the MRIS listing, in any flyers and other kinds of outreach you do, you need to communicate to the public that this $150,000 price is not going to be what you have to. Buyers won't have to qualify for a first mortgage in that amount, that there is special financing that will make it more affordable. So it's a little quirk of advertising at fair market value. You need to make sure you don't hurt any of your affordable market who can't afford fair market value. That, I think we can go back to questions.
More questions, okay. So, time to think of other questions you've got. And let me start back with Jennifer to see if we answered her question. I know that she was specifically interested in documentation of needing to lower a sales price. So, Jennifer, are you there now?
Yes, I think I like that language in there that's suggesting about the 5% and whatnot. So, and because you're right in comparing the other properties that lowered by like 10,000, we obviously have some additional bonuses in our home that those homes don't. So I get it.
Okay. Well, then in terms of documentation, if you do feel like the market is dropping and your original appraisal may not be fully current, then you should get some kind of update if you want some documentation to guide your marketing efforts. And that would be a broker's opinion letter, as was mentioned earlier, or you could talk to the same appraiser for a smaller fee. Probably they could issue an update to you. So if it's 6 months or 9 months or 12 months since that appraisal, the actual market has changed. But as you say, don't sell yourself short. Maybe your property is in fact worth more than some of the neighboring just owner selling properties that have not been renovated recently. Certainly not be as attractive, valuable as your NSP property.
And let's go back to Samuel. Hi, Samuel.
Oh, I didn't know if you necessarily need to take my call on that query, but David suggested the possibility of rental when there is a property that for whatever reason isn't moving. My question was whether or not there needs to be an amendment, et cetera, to the agreement with HUD or not, because it is temporary, and if that temporary period is 2 to 3 years, that's fine. But I was under the impression that, particularly under NSP 1, if the rental dollars that a PJ got, that they were from using rental monies for rent activities.
Okay, so a couple things that you spoke about needing to amend your application if you decided to rent rather than sell. That wouldn't be necessary. The typical things that trigger an amendment would be a change in beneficiaries, a change in location, scope of your application, a change in activity, right? Just changing from for sale to rental wouldn't necessarily trigger that.
But you would have to, this is Justin, you would have to change in DR to show it as a rental property. There's a little toggle there, but that's not a big deal.
Okay, so we don't have to make the adjustment in DRGR with respect to that particular site because it previously would have been recorded in DRGR as a for sale.
Right.
So now we just list it as a rental, and then as a caveat, temporary until such time that it's sold.
Yeah, you can. It's pretty close to what's happening with lease purchase too.
Okay.
But CDBG looks at for beneficiaries at initial occupancy. So if initial occupancy is rental, we need to know that. It helps us, because we're working along behind trying to figure out outcomes, and so when we know a unit is occupied, it affects how we analyze how it's affecting vacancies in the neighborhood.
Sounds good. I think I got it.
Thanks. And who's up next? It looks like, let's see. Daniel, I see your hand up, but I cannot unmute you, so you can call in using all of the call-in information on the event info tab in the upper left of your screen, or you can submit your question in writing. And let's go down to CP. And CP asks, what are folks doing when there's no available lender product for buyers' first mortgage loans? We have a lender where Bank of America was the secondary, and they have ceased this program.
Well, I guess it's a matter of searching for such a product. How large your community is, I don't know if there might be nonprofit organizations active in locality or your metropolitan area, or even who are operating affordable housing programs and who you might compare notes with as to possible lending sources. I'm sure from your question if the key is finding a lender who's willing to lend in the neighborhood at all, or willing to lend with a possible second mortgage around. But I mean, FHA product allows there to be a second mortgage, such as we're talking about here in option 2. So it seemed like there must be some kind of some course for FHA loans in your metro area, but it doesn't necessarily need to have a local lender who's willing to hold a loan in its portfolio as like a reinvestment kind of loan. Probably at least it should be FHA, where it's a little more accessible. But I've monitored that before. Maybe somebody else has a comment.
And hearing none, let's go to Tyrone. Hi, Tyrone, you're unmuted.
discussion for everybody around the country. Our situation is a little different. We've mastered the value issues. The big challenge we make now is getting enough qualified buyers to meet the 25% aside that purchase be at the 50% or below area median income. We're working with Habitat, some other local groups, and we're now maybe considering lease purchase. And what effects would that have on our program? One, what would be a recommended term for the buyer to get qualified to get permanent financing? And two, I think you've answered part of that. Maybe how would that affect our plan? Would we still be able to count that as a sale rather than a rental? Our goal is to have all of our houses be owner-occupied.
Martha, did you answer part of that, or do you want me to answer it?
Only you, but I'll just note, just to state the that I don't know if you have second mortgage assistance available. That
we are providing that through what we're calling an NSP seller's discount, is to not affect local values.
Okay.
And so, that does currently go as high as 40% for a 50% of AMI buyer.
See, so someone cannot access a second mortgage beyond 40% of the price. Is that right? That off part of the very low end of the income range from qualifying?
Well, currently I would have to say yes. If they don't qualify for a first mortgage with our 40%, unless they can bring cash to the table.
So my question would be, doing just your local math better than I do, but if that 4% limitation is the thing that's precluding your side categories from being able to afford one of the homes, I mean, maybe you could consider that a change that for that group. But
that's an elected official question, and
okay.
My leadership here we sort of decided that that would be one of the last things that we do is increase. We have a high number of subsidized housing units from Section 8 to stuff that we've done over the last 30 years in our community, and so there is a view of those super deep subsidies for home buyers by some of our elected officials.
Okay.
Just in terms of sustaining home ownership.
Right. I mean, and that's fine. The end goal here is that we want the homeowners to be sustainable, right? We want home ownership to be sustainable. So if you've determined, based on your analysis or the views of your local elected officials, that a higher down payment is required in order to ensure that the buyers you're drawing are going to be in this for the long haul, then that's appropriate. The other factor that I wanted to bring out was your question about lease purchase. You asked, I think, about how long was appropriate and how you would change it from being leased to a purchase. I guess the starting point would be the agreement that you set up with the tenant, right? Because while we're calling it a lease purchase, in essence, it really is two separate agreements, right? DRGR, it would read as a rental for the period of time that it was rental. And at that point in time which it becomes a for sale, then it would read as a for sale tied to that address. You want to make sure that you have language in that agreement that specifies the terms of this lease purchase. Because what you don't want to do is end up in a situation where you trigger the UA requirements would force you to pay relocation to the tenant when they couldn't buy. So as long as it's specified what the terms are, and if the tenant isn't able to comply with these terms and purchase it at the end of the agreement, then either you extend end the agreement, or the individual have to vacate the unit, then that would provide you with sufficient coverage from a compliance perspective.
Okay. So if we said, okay, this is a lease purchase, we're going to give you 36 months to get permanent financing in place.
And you might even lay out in there, if we are ready for home ownership, maybe there's certain home ownership assistance provisions that you plan to give them at the end of that 36-month period, right? Or your, expectations will be.
Correct.
Martha, I would just caution that if you've got an income segment who can afford to buy today because of the parameters of your assistance limitations and your assistance amounts, just to be careful that you're not setting people up for failure. I'm not clear how they would afford to buy in 3 years without some greater assistance than you're willing to give today. But, of course, there are cases where people do increase their income significantly, but
there may be enough folks out there who are just overburdened with consumer debt, so we're looking at counseling programs and things of that nature to help them get control over that part of their budget.
That's a clear answer. That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And we've got Mike who asks, after 3 days post-rehab, the maintenance can't go into the total development cost calculation for the purposes of the maximum sales price, but can these ongoing costs still be reimbursed to the grantee?
Yeah, the grantee. Yes, that's a good question because I felt confused myself about that. But my understanding is that the house still needs to be maintained and insured and et cetera, post 30 days. Those are eligible costs that could be paid with NSP funds. They, as you say in the question, they would not be calculated in the TDC itself.
Good. And let's go now to Teresa. Hi, Teresa. You're unmuted.
Yes, I wanted to know that if we were to use some of the homes that were going to be used for home ownership, if they were transferred over to rental units, would that mean that in our application we would go back to rating and ranking?
Which NSP program was that? At 1, 2, or 3?
2.
Yes. So for NSP 2,
you'd have to at least get it looked at, but if we decided it didn't affect the scoring, which in a lot of cases it doesn't, it wouldn't matter. It has to be looked at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And Zachary says, what if a lending institution will not loan below a minimum amount? For example, we're finding it tough to find a mortgage below $40,000.
Wow.
I know that often triggers like the high cost loan rule. In those cases, you may want to look for alternative sources. I know we have some grantees that are acting as the lender. Other cases, they're working with nonprofits.
Or CDFIs.
CDFI, right.
Who are willing to put non-standard price out there. The NSP2 grantee, the Center for Community Self-Help, who's the CDFI, they are uniquely positioned to understand NSP. Even if they're not going to be your lender, you could talk to them. I don't know if any of them are on the call, but they might be willing to provide some advice about who's in your area.
Very good. And let's see who's next. Kenneth, if the city does not use the acquisition plan, they adjust the money to say they are going to deposit. I'm not. This is unclear to me. Sorry, Kenneth. Let's see. Dave asks, if you switch from home ownership to rental activity, would you have to amend your? You would have to amend your action plan. Is this correct for NSP 3?
I missed the question.
So if you switched from home ownership to a rental activity, then you would have to amend your action plan. Is this correct?
Not necessarily. That's one of the things I was saying earlier. You have to look at the factors that trigger an amendment, right? And it's usually the scope of your program, the activities, or the target geography or beneficiaries, right? Simply going from rental to home ownership or vice versa doesn't necessarily trigger one of those factors, right? But not sure, then I just advise you to reach out to whoever your field rep is, or feel free to submit a question on the AAQ, and we could look at the specific details.
Could I add these questions about rental? Lee just want to reiterate a bit on marketing that we are resorting to changing a rental program. Just try to ensure that creative marketing outreach has been done, including housing counselors who are housing counseling is required for home buyers, but these housing counseling agencies are a great source of referrals for households who have gone through financial counseling, nonprofit organizations, churches, etc. So, there may be low-income people out there who'd be willing to buy a house with mortgage assistance. It's a good deal. Just have to take a lot of effort to find those people, and I'd like to emphasize that efforts get made before you turn to rental.
Do you have more questions in the wings? And I'll just take a moment to remind you that all of today's webinar will be archived, and that'll include the AV recording and the slides and a written transcript. Transcript takes a little bit longer to get there, as you might expect, but it will be there soon. And lots of upcoming webinars, a robust schedule, and this we had room here to go through January, but there's at least one scheduled into February also right now, and you'll notice that the last three here are a series, and I believe those are being done by NDC. Is that correct? I think so. Pretty sure those are being done by NDC. So you may find those interesting and want to attend.
The people who have had questions about the lack of appropriate mortgage money in their locality.
Yeah, good point. When you leave this webinar, you'll automatically be taken to a survey form, and we would greatly appreciate you taking a moment to answer that. It's a short questionnaire, and any written comments in particular that you have are especially helpful. So we'll thank you in advance for those. But we're not done yet. So we want to take, let's go to Dee's question. What happens when property taxes increase drastically and make the home unaffordable?
Well, they are dependent if the taxes are increasing before the sale takes place, then if you have an option 2 situation, those taxes would be taken into account when you're sizing the first mortgage and the second mortgage. It would be sized, to be affordable. So the best outcome is if the taxes go up earlier in time to be taken into account in the financing structure. The alternative is going up later on after the new homeowner has settled in, and taxes go up drastically. I guess hopefully, I don't know how drastically you mean, but if conservative underwriting principles were followed, let's say the first trust mortgage using that 30% ratio, hopefully there's some room for that person to afford those taxes. But worst case scenario, if it's really huge increases, the locality could consider some kind of assistance. You don't want your NSP homeowners failing in the first year or 2. So I've never heard of a locality where they went up so drastically, so quickly that people were immediately threatened. But these are different times. So if anyone else has suggestions.
Here none. Let's go now to Paulette. And you are muted, Paulette.
Hi. We're in the Allentown area, and we have added complexity. We are a community land trust model. What we've discussed we have a marketing committee, is instead of lowering the price, we were hoping to do an ad campaign. The only issue that we are grappling with is that when we do an ad campaign, how do we charge it to each individual property? NP requires that it be attached to a property, and we have 5 homes for sale. We sold 1. Any thoughts?
Is it possible? Oh, Paul. Oh.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it possible to split up those costs by property, or does it really encompass your whole program?
Well, it kind of encompasses the whole. We want to encompass the whole program. We think we could develop individual 15 or 30-second ads radio. The real issue is that the community land trust is so new to the area. It's a regional community land trust that people don't know that it's probably the best buy in the area, and they might be avoiding it because of the issue of not knowing who we are. We don't have a brand image. So, but we've had a campaign, and we've been getting rates, and they're pretty low. They're about $5,100. And even if one house sells through a 12-week campaign, think about that. $5,100 is probably a lot less than what you'd have to reduce, the sum of each property.
Yeah, that really sounds like an administrative cost, because you're really branding your overall program.
What you're actually doing, this is Jessie, is providing citizens information about your program. And that's why it's admin. It's actually the way you say it. The branding isn't a term that I would use. I get it, but and obviously W gets it. But what you're doing is under admin, you can provide citizens information about the program.
Right. If we did it by individual property, could we charge it to individual property?
If advertising specific properties and they're for sale properties, that can be activity delivery cost if that's a normal of doing business in your area and you're paying sort of a normal way of advertising a property.
Yeah, it is normal. It is a normal cost. I mean, we've done so
but
much.
From an accounting perspective, you have to have a way of displaying what the costs are associated with that property.
Because I used to work in advertising research, so each individual spot, they can identify what's said on that and how much it costs. It costs like $40 for a 15-second spot.
Okay. Right.
Paul Webster, I would agree just from a patient standpoint that you got to make sure the cost can be identified with a particular sale of property, sale of a particular property.
Right, about putting the address in the ad. In other words, have you heard about such and such a house on, on such and such a street, be economy, buy instead of rent. And that's basically what we're going to say.
Yeah. I think that if you can do that, you're okay.
Okay. Just nervous because of that. Don't want to.
Thank you, Paulette.
Thank you.
And Daniel is up next.
This is Danny with the Resurrection Project out of Chicago. Mine is kind of just, I don't know if you guys have gotten any feedback on some successful marketing strategies for NSP properties, just kind of in general across the market.
I just to piggyback on the last caller, I know that in New Orleans, for instance, they've been a kind of a coalition of groups created to do marketing across a number even of different developers, but to promote, NP houses as a way into your local neighborhood rather than rent. So, finding economy of scale and doing advertising and outreach and even signage or whatever. I suppose radio spots could be part of that, as the caller mentioned, even public service ads sometimes available free of charge. But and using the neighborhood organization networks, if there are active community-based organizations, they'd be a good referral source to find suitable buyers.
Okay, and my final question would be: are people having success marketing them prior to rehab, or are they leading to the properties rehab to really invest their marketing time and dollars?
I think it depends on the strength of the market, and so I would imagine, if the property is far enough along that there's a photograph of the outside at least that looks complete, and the market's not too slow, you could probably try to begin on outreach. Website would be another possibility to feature properties. You try to do it before it's completed if you can get something that looks pretty nice. If it's a rehab, if it's new construction, it may be a little more difficult to have that as complete look. But I think you try it. First trial and error will tell you, but I think you want to try to push the envelope towards marketing sooner. It's being in your Graham's best interests. But if you find that's not working, maybe wait till it's complete.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you.
The HUD folks have more anecdotes of the marketing.
Well, answers. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks, Daniel. And next up is Karen. Hi, Karen.
I want to know if there's a time frame or regulation that if we can put in place to limit the partner. We have a partner who submitted a significant number of hours under the service delivery reimbursement, indicating that they had spent the home had already been resold to the home buyer, but that they needed, let's say 40 hours in reimbursement, that it took them that long to reconcile their books. It was not for any new expenses incurred other than the time they spent. Seemed unreasonable to us.
See, Paul, go ahead.
Well, I think it's unreasonable, and I think you should for that position. You know better whether the procedure and processes you're following, whether they're really performing as they should. But I think first you're talking about the development costs, but that you've already sold the property, so you've already established what the total development cost was.
Right.
And if you do have a situation where somebody didn't for cost, there was that actually necessary, reasonable, and it was just a mistake, and you don't see a reason why you couldn't pay cost, but you still
right.
If you've already pushed the property, then you've obviously cut off the total development cost calculation at some point.
This had been a subrecipient, so there wasn't a developer fee involved.
If you think on the end that you've given them enough time and then they just haven't been submitting invoices and billings on a timely basis, that's your call.
Certainly, anything. It's just need to establish some internal type rule to what we consider reasonable.
Right. There's ways to look at everything, or like their time. I mean, I thought what you were asking was that you for the time, for just reconciling their books.
These are not hard costs. These were after the home has already been sold. They wait until that point to submit all of their for all of the expenses. So all of the expenses were accounted for, but then on top of that, they request reimbursement for an additional 40 hours that they said it took them to reconcile all the receipts.
For one unit or one project?
One pretty,
I would look very hard at it and ask them what's going behind that task. It does seem, to me, it depends on exactly what kind of accounting stuff you're asking them for.
Okay.
You might want them to procure a better accountant.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Tasks. So after rehab and after 30 days have passed since project completion, are utilities a qualified directivity cost? Would they continue to be until the unit is sold?
My understanding is yes, they would not be included in the total development cost calculation, but would be reimbursable, eligible for reimbursement by NSP.
Yes. So those would be eligible activity delivery costs. That's what we'd refer to them as. But they wouldn't influence the price of the property.
And Zachary, he says that in Seminole County, Florida, NSP 1, we have buyers before we purchase the home to rehab. This is an incomplete question. The house is not sitting for any duration, but see no question there. Sorry, Zachary. You can complete that and submit it if you care to. Let's go now. Julio has been waiting for a while. That's the scenario, the option 2 scenario. So I'm going to go back to, I think it was on slide 16 here. And there was an example after that. Here we go. So Joel's example is $2,000 fair market value / total development cost. $150,000 loan, which is affordable to the home buyer. So that's $150K, and $30,000 is the maximum home buyer assistance available. 30A there, and so they've got so 200. I'm sorry, that would be the sale price. Put it in the wrong spot. So they've got $150,000 first, $30,000 in assistance, and they're $20,000 short of funds. So what would you do here?
Well, the main option is this individual would be disqualified and not able to buy. The $1,000 cap on your ownership assistance is some low in a locality where you have $200,000 values. So, but if that seems to just imply a policy decision that you're really targeting people up close to the 120% AMI at lower income buyers. So you've treated that this particular buyer doesn't qualify. His income is not high enough to basically saying they need to get $170,000 first mortgage.
That looks
and the alternative is if your policy wasn't intending to exclude this person, to either up your second mortgage limit or find some additional public risk to make it work for that person. But the decision made on the face of it really precludes this person from being able to buy.
Good example, good question. And so I'm seeing no more questions at the moment. Any final words from anyone on our panel?
No, I think we're good. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. You know, I know I got a lot out of it, and I was surprised to see just by how large the audience was, but grateful for Martha's support and put this together for us.
And thank you, Martha Davis, for
good participation. I didn't know there'd be so many questions. So.
Questions.
Excellent.
Yep. Thank you all attendees for all of those questions and for being here, for participating. To Paul Webster, to Jesse Handforth-Combe, and to our usual NSP suspects, David Noguera, and the John wasn't here today, and Hunter Kurtz was. So thank you all, and we will look forward to seeing you soon on another NSP webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.